Today we'll finish what we started in part 4, so you may want to watch that part first. Part 4 also shows how to get the free Creative Content Pack. It installs some of the materials we're using. In any case, if you're watching on YouTube, you may also want to enable the English subtitles. By the way, today I will enlarge the user interface readings. I hope it will make the video easier to watch on 4K screens. My previous attempts caused text overlapping all over the place because my monitor is 1080p. But it seems they fixed it with the latest patch of PaintShop Pro 2021. Let's do it together. User interface, icon size, medium or large. Then, user interface, text size, large. If you don't have a 4K monitor, you will get this warning. Just say OK, and you get something like this. Let me know if you prefer this for my videos. Alright, in this part we'll first recreate the neon scene as a quick review of what we covered in part 4, along with a new style and a few extra tips on the way. Then we'll recreate the metal scene. Among other things, we'll make our own custom bars pattern and use it as the fill material of the vector text. Okay, let's recreate the neon scene. As usual, we start with a 1920 by 1080 scratch image with transparent background. Let me close the metal scene for now and walk you through the neon scene. As we can see, it consists of 4 layers. At the top of the stack we have a raster layer, used for vignette. Not really related to our main topic, but I will show you anyway a little later. Next we have a vector layer for the text object, and 2 raster layers for the background. The one at the bottom is just a solid black color, while the other one on top is a brick texture. The solid color is filling up the texture transparencies, thus making the texture really stand out. The exact same technique we used in the Christmas time scene in part 4. Notice also that just like the blue spruce texture layer in the Christmas time scene, the bricks texture layer has some styles applied to it. There is Bevel and there is Emboss. As we saw in part 4, depending on its light source color and opacity settings, Bevel may greatly affect the original color of the layer data. And that's exactly what happens here too. To see the original color of the texture, we can temporarily disable the layer styles. Here we go. The original color of the texture is this dark reddish shade. I will sample it with the eyedropper tool, but first let's reset the swatches in the materials palette to solid black and white with this little icon. Okay, now I'm looking for an opaque spot of the texture, something like this area over here. I can sample it either as foreground with the left mouse button, or as background with the right button. It doesn't really matter, so I'll just put it in the background swatch by right-clicking. Next I'm copying the color code into the clipboard, like so. Okay, back to our scratch image. Let's recreate those 2 background layers, starting with the black one at the bottom. The foreground swatch is already set to solid black, so all I have to do is to simply activate the Flood Fill tool, set its match mode to none, and left-click anywhere inside the layer, like so. Let's create now a raster layer for the texture, and optionally name it accordingly. Nice, we should now prepare the bricks material, and flood fill the layer with it. We already saw in the original scene that the main material is a dark red color, which we've already sampled into the background swatch in the materials palette. Furthermore, we also copied its color code to the clipboard. The color is still in the background swatch, but if it was not, we would simply paste the color code from the clipboard, like so. Since I made the original scene, I know that the solid color is mixed with the bricks texture, scaled to 153%. If you don't have that texture, install the free Creative Content Pack, presented in part 4 of the series. And here we have it. What's left for this one is the bevel and emboss layer styles. You can adjust them manually, but here I'm going to simply copy them from the original scene, using the context menu method. If your PSP version is older than 2020, you can use presets instead. We covered them in part 4. Bevel is the dominant style in this example, giving 3D looks to the bricks and tinting them blue. Embossing adds some white light, but my bevel settings overpower most of it. But it's still there. To get an idea, here is how it affects the texture when bevel is disabled. Anyway, feel free to experiment with both styles. And with that, we're done with the background of this scene. Text creation has been already covered in the series, including recreating existing text either manually or by using text presets. Today I'll use the clipboard to copy the original text. With the text layer selected in the original scene, go to Edit Copy. Then in the Scratch image, go to Edit, Paste as New Layer, and center the layer in the canvas. Notice that the layer styles have been also copied, so let's have a look at them. Besides the familiar bevel and drop shadow styles, here we also have outer glow. It produces this cool glowing effect, and we can adjust the size, the opacity, and the color. The color can also get sampled from the image or from any open image, if I switch out of the tab Documents mode, as I demonstrated in part 4 with the bevel style. So what happens here is that bevel and drop shadow give the layer a three-dimensional look, while outer glow makes it look illuminated. As for the text object itself, its fill material is just a solid color without any texture. Its stroke material is a similar solid color, again without any texture. In the description of the video, you'll find a download link for the original scene, in case you want to further experiment with all these settings. Vignette is a popular effect in photography, because it draws the eye to the main subject. The idea is to gradually darken, and optionally blur the picture towards the edges. There are non-destructive ways of doing that, using for example masked curves. There is also a specific effect. However, it is destructive and works only with raster layers. This pretty much means that before applying it, we need to merge all our layers into a new raster one. In recent versions of the program, we can right-click on the top layer in the Layers palette, then select Merge, visible to New Layer. Now we can vignette this layer. Effects, Photo Effects, Vignette. We can define the area to focus on, using any of the tools located over here. We can make it circular, rectangular, or even draw it freehand. We can also move it around and adjust its size, like so. The sliders below the tools are used mostly for adjusting the out of focus area. An exception to that is the diffuse glow slider, which is affecting mostly the in-focus area. I won't spend much time here. I just wanted to give you some pointers so you can experiment yourselves. I'll reset the settings to their default values. I'll specify a rectangular in-focus area, and here we go. To make corrections, we can undo or create a fresh merged layer, and try again. We have now successfully finished the neon scene, so we can move on to the metal scene. Alright. I've already created a fresh scratch image here, and I've also opened the original metal scene for reference. It consists of 4 layers. At the top, we have a vector layer for the text. Then we have an HSL adjustment layer. Not related to our main topic, but can be used for color grading non-destructively. I'll talk briefly about it a little later. Next we have a raster layer for the wooden floor, and at the bottom of the stack we have the general background. The new challenge here is the fill material of the text, these metallic bars. It is a custom pattern, which we'll create together. Okay, back to the scratch image. The general background is just the antiqued copper gradient, with default settings. We flood fill the layer with it, and we're done. The wooden floor is a little more tricky. First we need a new raster layer, like so. We'll flood fill it with the wooden tile 2 pattern, using again the foreground swatch in the materials palette. The background swatch can be used instead, and then right-click the mouse to flood fill the layer. Anyway, I'm leaving the pattern scale to 100%, and I'm changing the angle to 90 degrees. Next I'm flood filling the layer with the pattern of the foreground swatch, by left-clicking anywhere inside the layer. Okay, nice. Now I need to reshape this layer with the pick tool, switching the mode between perspective and scale as I go. As I mentioned in part 2, I think the pick tool should be one of the first tools you learn. Okay, I think I have transformed the floor layer to something similar to the original scene. I can always readjust it later, as needed. The floor in the original scene has a drop shadow style. As we know by now, instead of copying the settings manually, we can use the layers context menu to copy them all at once. Right-click, copy layer styles. Then in the scratch image, right-click, paste layer styles. Let me also reshape slightly the layer with the pick tool. Okay, good. Let me now add an HSL adjustment layer from this little icon below the layers palette. Alternatively, we can use the layers menu at the top of the screen, and then go to the new adjustment layer submenu. An adjustment layer allows for non-destructive adjustments, affecting all layers below it in the layers palette. Each adjustment layer comes with its own properties. This one can help with color grading. More specifically, we can adjust the hue, the saturation, and the lightness, giving uniform looks to our floor and background layers. We can even adjust basic colors individually, or switch to grayscale mode. Feel free to experiment. For this example, I'll set hue to 9, saturation to 0, and lightness to -53. And here we have it. It's now time to recreate the text. We start with 50% gray for both the stroke and the fill. It's a neutral color, with code 808080. I've already set the color swatches accordingly in the materials palette. As a matter of fact, the fill color is not important at this point, because it will get the color of our custom pattern. Which, by the way, will also be 50% gray. Anyway, I have also predefined the rest of the text attributes, so let's create the text. And center it in the canvas. As expected, it's been created on its own vector layer, with the predefined attributes. Okay, good. As we know, the stroke and fill materials of vector objects can be defined separately. So, we can change the fill of the vector text to a pattern, for example. The cool thing is that we can also use any of the currently open images as a pattern. They are displayed at the top of the list. We can even use the image we are currently working on, which is crazy, and probably useless. In any case, this means that we can create a new image, and use it as a pattern on the fly, without even needing to save it first. And that's what we're going to do next. Seamless patterns don't have to be huge, because they are repeated. However, if we plan to apply them with a scale way more than 100%, we should have a big image. In our case, a 128 pixels square is fine. Patterns are usually opaque, But for this one I need a transparent background because later on, we'll apply a bevel style. As shown in part 4 with textures, without a transparent background, the bevel style will not affect each bar individually. It is the same thing for patterns. Okay, we're going for 8 bars, evenly spaced across the width of the canvas, with each bar being 8 pixels wide. You can try different numbers, but that's what worked best for me. I'll make the first bar with the pen tool, which I introduced in part 3 for curved text. Here I will set the draw mode to lines and polygons, predefine the stroke to 8 pixels, keep the stroke color to neutral gray, and I'll disable the fill. Now I can draw the line. I'm holding down the Shift key on the keyboard to ensure that the line will be straight. It looks fine, let's commit it with the Apply button. It was created on its own vector layer, in the Layers palette. I don't need this default raster layer, so I'm deleting it to keep things clean. Next, instead of drawing the second bar, I'm simply duplicating the first one. We don't see it because it's placed on top of the first bar, but we can see its layer in the Layers palette. Okay, I keep duplicating them, until I have 8 bars one on top of each other. Then I select them all in the Layers palette, by holding down the Control key on the keyboard, while clicking on each one of them. Another method is to click on the first layer, and then Shift-click on the last one, but in my experience it often screws things up. With all bars selected, we can go to Objects Distribute, and choose Space Evenly Horizontally. All bars are now spaced evenly across the canvas. However, we don't want a gap on both sides, because they will produce a double gap between repetitions of the pattern. So we should delete one of them. We can do that with the Crop tool, located over here. Set the mode to Freeform. Drag the right side to the edge of the last bar. Hit the Apply button. And we're good to go. Alright, back to the scratch image, but let me switch out of the Crop tool. Okay, much better. Even though we haven't saved it, the bars image shows at the top of the patterns list, because it's currently open inside the program. We can make the bars look thinner, or thicker, by adjusting the scale. And of course we can also change the angle. Anyway, in the original scene, I've set the angle to 0 degrees, and the scale to 75%. To make this pattern permanently available, we can save it in any of the folders listed inside the File Locations dialog, under Patterns. But I'm not going to do that now. We can also save the bars image in any folder, then load it on demand and use it as a pattern. And with that, we're done with our text materials. What's left now is a few layer styles, and we can call it a day. I've actually used just 3 layer styles: Drop Shadow, Bevel and Reflection. Reflection is the new style here, so let me quickly demonstrate before I copy all styles from the original scene. Its settings are pretty straightforward. We can adjust the size, the opacity, and the axis offset. It's not super flexible, but we can quickly create nice vertical reflections. Okay, I'm now quickly copying the layer styles from the text layer in the original scene, as we've done so many times already. Reflection size and opacity are set to 50. The axis offset is set to 3, producing this little gap between the text and the reflection. These are the settings I used for the drop shadow. And here are the settings I used for bevel. In our case, the text color is actually the light source color, defined in this bevel style, because we started with a neutral gray color for both the stroke of the text and the bars pattern. If they had biased colors, the end result would be a mix of those and the light color of the bevel. It would make it hard to target a specific shade as the final color. And remember, the bars are affected individually by the layer styles, because we made our pattern with transparent background. In the description of the video, You'll also find a download link for this scene, so you can further experiment. In case you don't already have them, you will also find links for the fonts I used in the neon end metal scenes. I'd like to also point out that stroke and fill materials may be used with any vector object, not just text, like shapes and paths for example. You may want to experiment with those too. There is a lot more we can do with text in PaintShop Pro, if we first convert their layer to raster. Everything under the effects menu, for example, is designed to work with raster layers. If you want to try it, keep in mind that rasterized text cannot be edited. There is no longer a separate text object on the layer, and of course there is no edit text command in the context menu. A common trick is to duplicate the vector text, hide the original, rasterize the copy, and apply a raster effect on the copy. This way, we can rephrase the original vector text, without needing to redefine the attributes. But we still need to make a new raster copy before applying a raster effect. In a nutshell, there is a huge array of raster effects, but they're specific to raster layers, and they are destructive. In this series, we focused mostly on layer styles, which are very few, but they can apply to any layer, and they are non-destructive.
Thank you for watching.